Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, where we are having yet another news day as we have a whole bucket load of new releases, platform updates made throughout the month of August. So, join me. I'm going to step through the release notes, talk about what each of the different things means, one or two quick things to show you, and then we'll go from there. As always, if it is your first time around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stick around, say hello in the comments, let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to see, what kind of weird and wacky demos I can pull up for you. Until then, let's crack on and have a look at some updates. Okay, so August 2021, there's a load of stuff happened. So first and foremost, Databricks Repos is GA. So again, Databricks Repos is that far better way of working with source control with your notebooks. So rather than having to go into each individual notebook and sync that one and sync that one and sync that one and remember to actually commit your changes and only having one copy regardless of feature branching, we now have this real, actual, works more like any other source control in the world way of hooking into a repo. That's now gone GA. It was in preview, but people were kind of just using it anyway. And it's now fully available, which is awesome. And we'll get on some more changes around that in terms of automating that in a bit. So it's all good. Interface changes for Delta Live tables, and we're going to see this on a regular cadence, right? Every month we see we've made the UI a little bit better. We've made it a bit better. We've made it a bit better. So again, there's more stuff coming in, better ways of selecting the notebooks, better ways of controlling the notebooks that go into it. We can now type our own ones in rather than having to pick an existing one. Nice. The Spark UI, logs, all of that kind of stuff used to be just take you out of it. So you constantly, if you want to know more details, you click a link, you go into that page, and then you have to get back to your actual page. It's just, yeah, opened in a separate tab. Just makes sense. Again, just usability, maturity stuff coming in as people are feeding back about the preview for those who want it. Okay, more control about materializing tables. So previously, when we're using Delta Live tables, it uses schema inference a lot. And that means you don't really have control about what it inferred. What if it gets the data types wrong? What if it chooses to name things wrong? What if we don't like it? And we can now do this. So we've got two different ways that we can tell it which schema to enforce on the table it is creating. So we can either just do a normal Sparky style struct, and we pass it in on our within our table decorator. We go, this is the schema, pass in that struct type object. Or we can also do it in SQL style and just pass in a big old string, which is name, data type, name, data type, name, data type, and so on. Again, just nice, useful, if you want to be a little bit more nuanced. I'm assuming it's going to act a little bit more like schema hints, where if it inferred an int, but we know it should be a long in the long run, then that kind of thing, you know, so kind of adjusting and upscaling data types is where I see people using it more than anything else. But again, nice, useful, good to be able to define this stuff and have it a little bit more managed, that little bit more curated as we're looking after stuff. So you can now do that. Check that out if you're on the preview already. There's an increased timeout for long-running jobs. So if you are one of those people who've been running notebooks for over 2 days and then you're really upset that it breaks after 2 days, you can now have a notebook that runs for 30 days. I mean, you shouldn't. That shouldn't be a thing that you are doing. Unless you're streaming. Absolutely fine to have a streaming notebook up for weeks, months. I mean, you should regularly kind of restart it and use checkpoints to kind of restart natively and easily. I don't know why you would need to have a batch style notebook, a notebook that you're running yourself and you go and it takes 30 days. It takes a month to finish. But apparently this is something people have been doing and have fed back and said, please, can we have some longer timeouts? So there you go. You can now build the terrible things people have been trying to build. Cool. The job service gotten slightly better. So in terms of how it was identifying jobs, it was possible to have some kind of clashes with the actual job IDs that were created. So they've made some improvements. They've kind of increased the size of the ID, made it kind of a little bit better, and changed how it's kind of pulling back some of the responses in the jobs API. So again, just a little bit more maturity, a little bit more, I guess, people who are kicking off thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs. And they'll be able to have that unique identifier and be able to automate a lot of that stuff. Again, just making it a little bit better. Okay. User entitlements granted by group membership in the admin console. I mean, that is super useful. And it's part of some other stuff that we'll hopefully talk about next week. So generally, the management of users in Databricks isn't great. It's okay. But that kind of, I've got a user who I've added in. They're part of a group. That group I've given a load of privileges to. I can't really check that user and see what that user can do without knowing the part of that group and then going and looking in that group. So generally just improving how we manage that users and kind of what access do people have. So improvements to the UI around that stuff. But again, we'll talk more about that kind of stuff in the next couple of weeks. There's some interesting stuff. Okay, need to manage ML flow experiment permissions. So again, we've seen some changes in the past few months about that, just slowly improving the ability to have some enterprise grade security around ML flow and the experiments and who can go in and see that kind of stuff. So again, they've now made it easier to configure those permissions. So last time we saw there's more permissions that we can add. Now we've seen it's actually easier to manage those permissions. And we're not going to dive into that. Okay, better job creation from notebooks. That is a little thing that we can do. If we dive over here, you may have seen you've got this little schedule icon. So if you see that, you can actually say, rather than have to go to the jobs tab, create a new job, go and find this notebook. You'll be able to do that for a while. You can scatter the job, and that just made the UI a little bit better. We can say, well, how often do we want to schedule it? I'm just going to go do that. You can see all the history of different jobs. We can go and dig into those different jobs that are running. Again, they've just kind of baked it a little bit more into the rest of that process. So you can go and see all the jobs that are associated to a notebook. You can clone existing jobs if you want to run many times. You can edit the existing jobs all from within a given notebook, which is just a nice, easier way to be able to do it that way around rather than have to go to jobs and work from there. Okay, we've got a new VM type that you can create your clusters from. So this is an Azure thing specifically. And yeah, we've got the DDSV4 VM types. Now, I had a quick mooch around the description of that. I've not seen much of those myself, but it's a very specific process, a very particular type of machine they put together. And it sounds a bit like an upgrade to the existing kind of DS series of machines that we've been seeing. So it's a very good combination of CPU, memory, decent SSD. So it's actually got all the different components that obviously we're looking for general production workloads. So it's not this kind of massive beast, loads of memory associated to it. It's not kind of the heavy compute things we might do if we're doing streaming. It is kind of that good balance for balanced workloads. What I've not seen, what I don't know yet, can we actually go and see, is I don't believe it is Delta Cache enabled. So if you're looking for something that is Delta Cache enabled, you might not see that in this list. I've not even checked to see where it is in the list, and it's probably dug down into some of our D series, and now I can't even see it anywhere in the list. Okay, so I don't know where it's going to be surfaced. I don't think, might be wrong, I don't think it's going to be Delta Cache enabled. So we need to be a little bit careful, but if you're using that, you might not get some of the benefits you see. If you've been waiting for that machine, or you've got a real particular compute type of problem that you're trying to fix, take a look at those VMs and see if that's going to fix your issue. Easy as. Okay, improve support for collapsing notebook headings. So this is something I hadn't really had to play with. It's kind of hadn't really tried before, and actually it's really useful. So essentially you've now got collapsible headings, and you've now got some shortcut buttons to expand or collapse all. So if we go over into here, if I just dive into that most recent notebook I was having to play around with, dive into this one. Okay, so you can see I've got a notebook, and I've got kind of a level 3 header, got some code, got some stuff, I've got a level 5 header, and then I've got another level 3 header. Okay, so I've just got some markdown, and I could have just loads of bits of code all the way through this. This could be just a giant notebook with lots of bits and pieces. And we've seen this thing before. We've got that nice little thing that's automatically going to summarize, a bit like a Word document, all of my different levels of headers. And I can go and have a play around and shortcut to each of those. So generally, if you've got a massive notebook, just slap some markdown in there, and it'll make it easier to navigate through it. Then the nice thing is for each of these levels, you can collapse anything that comes underneath. So there's one cell, that cell 5 is underneath my level 5 header. So I can just collapse that into it. I can go, well, that just gets into that. And then up top, I've got my main header, which includes that command 4 in the collapsed one. I can collapse all of those. That's what we've got in terms of collapsible headers. So that individually looking at the cells that are underneath it until it finds another header at the same level, and then being able to collapse that up. But then we've got this kind of little nice expand all headings, collapse all headings. So if you've got a very big workbook that's got loads and loads of different sections and details, and you're kind of taking someone on a massive journey with loads of explanations, loads of code, you can kind of just collapse these things up so people can drill down to the detail if they need it, but they don't have to wade through the detail to find what they're looking for. Again, nice little quality of life improvement. And actually, I'm probably going to whip through a lot of our like general ETL notebooks and just make sure that kind of they are organized so we can collapse them up. So if someone's supporting it, they don't have to go through the initialization and the metadata collection and the transformations. They can go straight to the write and the output and find out what happened. Easy if we set all this stuff up properly. Okay, I've also got Runtime 9 going GA. Again, that was like the shortest known from being released on beta on August 10th through the following week to being put into GA. And that we went through the runtime last week. I think it was last week, talking about all the new stuff in Runtime 9. Go catch that video if you didn't. We're not going to talk through it now. Okay. They got lots of changes. I mentioned we'll come back to this. So Databricks Repos, we've seen it's just gone GA. It now also has 2 bits of support. I think part of the thing stopping it doing GA was support to do things programmatically. So we're now seeing it's supported through the Databricks API and it's supported through the Databricks CLI, the command line interface. So if you're trying to do things like automatically add a new repo in, you're looking to update a repo with new information, you're looking to switch a repo over to a different feature branch, you can now do a lot of that stuff automatically. So if you're doing things like trying to automate, you're doing a pull request, right? But currently in Databricks repos, if I've cloned a repo and I've got that set on my feature branch, and I go into GitHub or Azure DevOps, where I happen to be, and I do my pull request, and I delete that feature branch as part of it, then Databricks doesn't get updated. Databricks doesn't realize that feature branch is no longer existing because it's been merged into my primary code line. Now I could, as part of that pull request, actually include something that goes back, connects to Databricks repos, removes anything from that was attached to that feature branch and updates it into the primary dev branch. We can do that. We can make our lives a little bit easier by just adding in and automating that DevOps workflow because we've now got the REST API and the CLI are available. So super useful. Take a look in there. You can see all the different commands that you've got. Again, no surprises in there. We can create, we can delete, we can update things. We can get a list of what we're currently doing. No particular shocks in there. Cool. All right, Runtime 7.6 support has ended. So again, unless you're on the LTS version, which has got extended support, I think 7.3, you probably want to be on at least Runtime 8 by now. Again, I'll be looking at the package report, be looking at any changes in there. More Databricks repo stuff. So going into the audit logs now. So if previously when we're attaching a repo and cloning it and pulling it and deleting a repo, there was no record of that. So actually having that as exposable, readable audit events just means we're a little bit more logged, a little bit more traced. That's all good. Okay, so the job creation and management workflow is slightly better. Again, kind of this is linked into that improvement of the job creation UI. Again, just tidying that up. It's got another part of that. Photon is now available. So it is in public preview, but it's now in ungated public preview for Databricks clusters. And again, we did a video about that. Go and have a look at that. That just means when you're creating your Databricks cluster, you can tick that little magic button of, I would like you to run in Photon mode, please, which limits the runtimes that you have available, but means you've got that Photon engine. So you'll see certain workloads, very aggregation, joins, very kind of analytics style workloads should go faster. Therefore, you can get away with a smaller cluster, but beware because it's more expensive. So you're looking for a more expensive cluster for a short amount of time. If you hit those limitations, again, check that video out, what those limitations are and the kind of thing to look for. Okay, better ways of doing Git credentials. We looked at things like the Azure DevOps tokens and being able to authenticate with that. Again, we've improved how we do that. If you're on your user settings, it's kind of made that slightly easier to go and do. Again, kind of if you go to your user settings, you can pre-set up how you want to connect to things like Azure DevOps, Git, all that kind of stuff. Importing notebooks. So if you're not using DVCs, you don't want to use that kind of the Databricks essentially compiled zip of notebooks. say you just got a load of HTML notebooks and you want to import many together. Previously, you couldn't. You could only do it if you use the Databricks CLI and you put it in a local folder and then you program and get it and you upload it, and it's slightly awkward to have to type some code to be able to upload a load of files together. Now they change it so you can create a zip file that has a load of notebooks in there in their native formats. That can be HTML, it can be Python, SQL, Scala, R. So create a zip file, put a load of notebooks in it, upload that zip file, and it will unpack it and install those notebooks for you. As it mentions, it cannot include a combination of format. So either HTML or Python, Scala or R, but you can just at least do things en masse, which is nice. Okay, and finally, some more changes on the Delta Live Table stuff. Again, I realize a lot of people aren't on the preview, so it may not be useful for you, but it is kind of useful to run through. Again, so they just made the UI better. So specifying the target database is now just something you see in the UI. Being able to syntax highlight for SQL, so it actually understands the SQL that you're writing, to just make it a little bit easier just to freehand write that SQL statements into your notebook. It now understands things like live as a keyword. Things like seeing the pipeline graph before running the pipeline. Again, if you go and watch any of those Delta Live Table videos, you see there's just a slight moment of frustration where you hit go and then it thinks about things. And it's only once it actually sort of spins up the cluster and starts working and processes and starts actually getting the first bit of data going that again goes, oh, by the way, here's the visual of all the steps I'm going to go through. Now it's going to go through, works out its plan, shows you the plan before it starts any work, and you just get that visual idea of what are the steps, what's it found, what are the dependencies, what work is it about to do. You get that up front, so it's a little bit easier. And finally, Python libraries are now installed before it does anything. So previously it would find the %pip install and then kind of get to it and run it at that point, I guess. Now we'll go find anything it needs to do, run them all as the cluster starts up, get out of the way, and it should just make things a little bit faster and a little bit easier. And again, there's more detail about how you bring custom libraries into scope on that doc. Oh, okay, so that is a giant part of things. Oh, that's lots of time talking through so many of those different changes. There's a lot in there. However, that's not the major news this month. So two big other things happened which aren't in this release notes. One is another funding round for Databricks, and so we've seen a huge extra amount of money go into the rocket ship, as all the Databricks guys call it. So again, we're going to see more acceleration, we're going to see more features, we're going to see them doing more and more and more stuff on the platform. So again, if you're a Databricks user, if you're trying to kind of build around the platform, always good news that they're getting that funding, that they're expanding and growing insanely. So that's one bit of news. Probably doesn't affect you that much if you're just using Databricks as a platform. The other bit of news is only on the AWS side of the release notes. So there's a release about a thing called Serverless SQL. And that's been a bit of a sore point whenever we're talking about serving layers. Whenever we're talking about taking data that's in a lake and exposing it to end users, to BI tools, to people who are actually just trying to put a dashboard on it and they want instant response. And Databricks SQL, which was part of that Databricks SQL analytics that's been in preview for a long time, and kind of we can go and kind of see bits and pieces of that SQL endpoint. But it always had but it needs a cluster turned on. Yeah, I mean the cluster's turned on quickly, but 4 minutes or so, and then you can start getting some quite quick, snappy answers to your queries. But there's a lot of other tools, a lot of other competing products out there are doing that real quick. We can serve it. You look in Synapse, you've got serverless SQL, you've got serverless SQL pools that allow you to write a query, hit go, and you'll get an answer very quickly without having to wait for something to start up. Snowflake has similar responses. Lots of all these different database platforms have similar things that you can do to say, I don't want to wait for a cluster to start up. I don't want to be paying for a cluster that's just turned on in case a user comes along and happens to run a query. So in this announcement, Databricks are going to provide their own version of that. Being able to run SQL-style queries against your lake, against Databricks, but without having a cluster turned on. That's pretty cool. There's loads of stuff in there. Now, we are very, very early days. So there's a public preview. It's a gated public preview, so you need to go and talk to Databricks and tell them why you want to be on that preview. And it's only on Amazon currently. So it's only on AWS to actually sort of get started with that stuff. So eventually we'll be seeing it over on the Azure side, I'm sure. Timescales, who knows? And I'm sure, again, that'll be a preview, and it'll be in a preview for a while. You'll be able to get onto the preview if your particular company has a real good use case to prove it, and you talk Databricks and say, hey, we want to be using this. We think we can actually make a real good case for it. But actually, as to we're not on those previews, when are we going to see this stuff? It's probably a long way off if we're just hearing about it now. But things that we know. So it is SQL only, keeps calling it SQL endpoints. And again, SQL endpoints is the name for the Spark clusters in Databricks SQL. It's the same as a Spark cluster, but it's just SQL. And it has Photon, it has a built all for that kind of stuff. It starts with low latency. Something instant startup, we'll see how instant it actually is. I like to see it kind of get turned on, some stuff that's going on. That's it. It's kind of all we've really got in terms of what's happening. So if we go and dig further into it, there's blogs and news and all that kind of stuff happening. And it'd be really interesting to see how it actually fits into an architecture, how it actually fits into security is going to be awkward. Because this is the one that we keep seeing. So operate out of a control plane and data plane. So if you've been looking at Databricks architectures before, it's the control plane, which is essentially where you log in, where you see your notebooks, where you see the workspace, where all the stuff that actually you don't think about because it's actually part of the service. And then you've got your clusters, the actual machines and the storage and the network config that gets spun up when you turn a cluster on. And that separation, the clusters are in your VMs. They are in your networks. They are wherever you put them. The control plane is on the Databricks control side. And what they keep talking about in terms of the serverless data plane is that's going to be on the Databricks side, not in your side. So how we work with that and what that means for where your data is going to be in the same region, going to be in the same Azure data center when it gets to Azure, I assume. AWS data center for now. But what does it mean for doing things like networking? What is it doing things like actually plumbing into a secure architecture? How do we actually use it in anger? And again, it's way too early to have any idea about any of that stuff. They're just the immediate things we think, how's it going to work? It's a bit different. In the grand scheme of things, Databricks is saying they're going to have a load of pre-warmed SQL endpoints that we can say, hey, just throw a query at it. It'll grab one of the pre-warmed endpoints, spin it up, connect it to us, do the work for us so that we get real snappy serverless query performance. I mean, that's great. Fantastic. No idea about cost. No idea about limitations. No idea about when we're going to see it and timelines. But from a news point of view, pretty big news. So that's probably the biggest thing that's happened this month. The Databricks have released this blog post. They've released these release notes saying, we have this thing called serverless SQL endpoints. You're going to start seeing it get rolled out across AWS and eventually to Azure and eventually to GCP. How's it going to work? We don't know yet. How are users going to find it? We don't know yet. But it is really aiming at that. People just want quick answers without turning a cluster on. And if it's a good answer to that, if it's a real solid, performant, fast way of getting to that answer, that is a real strong message and a very big contender. Changes how we think about serving data out of the lake. So it's exciting stuff. And yeah, on that bombshell, we'll end it there. So loads of stuff happening in August. Again, the usual things that we see in terms of feature improvements, quality of life, making the UI slightly nicer. Some big things in terms of repos going GA and some just niceties in terms of making things easy to collapse and working with notebooks. Again, Databricks SQL Serverless is the big news, but it's not going to be news for a lot of people for quite a while until we can actually get our hands on the preview and it's in all of the cloud providers. And we can actually use it in anger and see how it fits into proper architectures. But always a fantastic direction, great news, and yeah, always good direction. Cool. All right, and that is me for today. So as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what you think of those news items. What do you think of Databricks SQL Serverless? What do you think? Were there any of those bits and pieces that I very quickly ran through that you go, no, that is bigger than news than you think. This is why we're using it and it's awesome. Let me know down in the comments. We'll go from there. Till then, I'll see you next week for some more videos and some more techie stuff, and we'll see you then. Cheers.